Well, thank you for having me. And before I begin, I want to thank Kevin Henson for inviting me to be a speaker at this most important historic commemorative event. He asked me to talk about trade trails and trade ships to early California. So let's talk with the trails, which I call California's first highways. Thousands of years prior to any European Spanish contact in California, there were hundreds of native pathways and trading routes throughout what we now call California. One tiny example is the area I'm most familiar with in the Lake Tahoe area of the Washoe tribe. And you can see how complex their trails were in that time. And these trails date back over 10,000 years. The native population of California at that time was between 250,000 and 300,000, spread among 22 family language groups with about 135 different dialects. By 1900, it is estimated that only about 15,000 native people survived. Starvation due to gold seekers invading their lands, along with white man's diseases and extermination by gold seekers, were the chief cause of the decline in the huge numbers. What those ancient people did leave for us were those trade routes, many of which became our modern roads and highways. After the Spanish settled in San Diego in 1769, there was a need to get goods to the settlers. Most of these necessities came by ship and some came by land. The mission system was eventually comprised of 21 missions. This system was established along the ancient Indian trade trails that became known as the King's Highway, or El Camino Real. The missions were built from San Diego to Sonoma. Most of the travel was on this road. However, there were many other roads by that exact name of El Camino Real. In 1775 and 1770 to 1776, Juan Bautista de Anza led 240 settlers from New Spain, Mexico, to settle on the San Francisco Bay and claim it for Spain. Anza was following those Indian trade trails, recording encounters with Indians as he was following their trails. Now remember, 1776, what was going on the East Coast of the United States? Our independence. And here at the same time, Spain was claiming the West Coast for their country. The first non-native trade route to Alta California, i.e. San Diego, may have been what Fremont called in 1844 as the Old Spanish Trail. This new branch of the Old Spanish Trail was established by Antonio Armijo in 1829 to 1830 from Albuquerque to San Diego. However, there were other overland trails from Baja California. These were all foot trails and animal pack trails. The trail of our focus is a road that was built to bring U.S. Army of the West with the Mormon Battalion to San Diego to fight the Mexicans. It was the assignment of the Mormon Battalion under the command of Colonel Philip Cooke to build a wagon road into California, and this they did. I'm sure you're going to be hearing more about this later on in this symposium. Before the Mexican Revolution of 1821, Spain did not want trade ships from any other countries coming into California. Spain wanted full control of the west coast of North America. However, it did not stop some foreign ships from coming illegally to the West Coast. One example was that of John Jacob Astor, founder of the American Fur Company, was looking to expand his fur trading empire and settled Fort Astoria in what is now Oregon. At that time, it was just the Northwest Territory. And that was at the mouth of the Columbia River in 1810. 2 years later, he sold out to the Northwest Fur Company. There was also the Russian settlement in Fort Ross and Bodega Bay, just north of San Francisco in 1812. Perhaps it was too far north and out of reach of the Spaniards to prevent them from keeping the Russians out. When Mexico revolted against Spain in 1821, everything changed, and for the trade business to the West Coast. Now the trade ships from other countries, US, France, the United Kingdom, were allowed to come into California. Even before 1821, there was some smuggling going on in California, including some American ships. Now with Spain out of the picture, trading business continued to escalate. California during the period of 1821 to 1846 was a wonderful, peaceful place to live if you did not engage with politics that was in constant turmoil. Sounds familiar. On the political front, 1821 to 1846, California had 14 different Mexican governors. If you could stay away from politics and stick to ranching, life was wonderful. Most ranchos had huge herds of cattle and horses. A few examples of their size. Francisco Pacheco had 90,000 acres, 20,000 head of cattle, 500 horses, 15,000 sheep. John Sutter had 48,000 acres, 4,000 head of cattle, 800 horses, and 10,000 sheep. Pio Pico had 59,000 acres, 10,000 head of cattle, and 1,500 horses and 5,000 sheep. There were well over 1,000 ranchos ranging from the modest to the huge, like that of Pacheco. During the Spanish period, from 1784 to 1821, there were only about 30 Spanish land grants issued. The Spanish grants ranged in size from 160,000 acres to about 3,100 acres. Spain granted land for settlement with grazing rights to specific tracts of land to mostly military and those individuals who showed alliance to Spain. However, Spain retained title to the land, and this did not set well with the Mexican citizens of California at that time. From 1821 to 1846, there were about 1,100 Mexican land grants ranging from 133,000 acres down to 940 acres. Unlike under Spanish control, the Mexican grants allowed the land to be owned by the grantee. Life during the Mexican period centered on the ranchos and raising cattle. The rodeo most likely started in California with the roundups, branding, and slaughtering of cattle. The vaqueros were excellent horsemen, spending many hours a day on horseback. They did not hesitate to show off their riding skills to the ladies. These roundups would take place from about July 1st through October with lots of excitement, music, dancing, games, horse riding skills, competition, and food. Food and more food. Not to mention the drinking. Well, I guess I just did. And more drinking. And drinking after that. This was also the time of the bloody bull and grizzly bear fights, which was great entertainment. While the roundups were going on, others were preparing the hides for market and rendering the fat into tallow, all in preparation for the arrival of the Boston ships. Hides and tallow were the main, if not only, industry in California. The hides were worth from $1 to $2.50. Tallow was worth about 60 cents a pound, with a single animal producing about 75 to 100 pounds. The hides were known as the California banknotes. That means that each head of cattle was worth about $8 or $300 on today's value. There were also there was always way more meat than could be consumed. So after the roundup and celebration was over, the land was littered with dead carcasses that were being feasted upon by vultures, bear, and other animals, including maggots and flies. When preparation was made for the arrival of Boston ships, which I call the Walmart of the sea, we know what the Californians were trading: hides and tallow. But what were the trade ships bringing? These ships would bring in a variety of needed and desired items, including silks, satins, woolens, jewelry, hardware, needles, pins, crockery, tinware, cutlery, bulk iron, tools, nails, sugar, tea, coffee, hats, clothing, tobacco, and of course, liquors, plus the manufactured leather products made from the very hides that had sailed east around the Horn the year before. The arrival of trading ships was a huge event celebrated by the Mexicans, which was a very laid-back, slow-paced lifestyle. The ships would arrive at the port, and a rider was sent to notify the residents that the ships were in port. The sailors would display their trade goods aboard the ship or on the beach. This allowed the Mexican men and women arriving at their leisurely pace to trade their hides and tallows for the goods. This meant a ship could spend weeks in one port before being able to visit other ports. Richard Henry Dana, who wrote the book 2 years before the mass, arrived in 1835. Indeed, he did not have much good to say about the Californios. Here's what he said: "They are idle, shiftless people and can make nothing for themselves. The country abounds in grapes, yet they buy bad wine made in Boston and buy shoes made by their own hides, which had been carried twice around the Horn. Fondness for dress among the women is excessive and is often the ruin of them. Nothing is more common than to see a woman living in a house of only 2 rooms and the ground for a floor, dressed in spangled satin shoes, silk gown, high combs and gilt, if not gold earrings and necklace." Other mariners, however, found the girls of California irresistible, and some even married them. Under Spanish rule, there might be 3 or 4 ships a year that would be allowed to bring goods to California. But after 1821, when Mexico took over, the number of trade ships escalated to as many as 40 per year. Boston ship captain John Cooper came to California in 1823. He settled in California, married Mariano Vallejo's sister, Encarnacion, and became a citizen of Mexico, which meant he also had to become a Catholic. He continued operating the Boston ship Rover that went between California, Hawaii, and the Orient. Corruption was the norm with the trading ships. The Mexican import duty tax could be as much as 100%. So some were very creative individuals came up with a plan. Now remember, during this period, the government was nearly always in turmoil. If your man was not in office, it became the norm to cheat the government in any way you could. If one were an enterprising sea merchant with high profits in mind, one would hedge the profit margin in one's favor. The following is taken from the book 75 Years in California by William Heath Davis. Here is how he described one of those tax evading schemes. The ship Don Quixote left Honolulu on 31st of May and returned to the coast, entered Monterey and traded along the coast for the remainder of the year, and left Santa Barbara, returning to Honolulu in February of 1843. Sailing then, she arrived at Yerba Buena, which is San Francisco, on the 20th of May. On this voyage, we also brought a full cargo of merchandise. Immediately, subprefects, a Mexican inspector, came on board and ordered us to Monterey for entry. I knew the subprefect well and told him the tide would not permit our leaving until the next day. He then placed a guard upon the vessel to remain with us until we left the port, which was not the regular custom house, officer, but a citizen selected by him for this special duty. We had purpose in coming to Yerba Buena first, while the merchants and captains trading on the coast had a desire to keep on friendly terms with the Mexican government. They had no thought or intention of opposing it in any way. At the same time, they did not entertain so much affection for it as to induce them to contribute to its revenues any more than they could well avoid, or so whenever they saw an opportunity to outwit the custom authority, they availed themselves to it. Soon after the guard was placed on board, one of us who knew him very well approached him and told him we were going to lock him up in the stateroom. What, said he in surprise? What is the matter? We laughed and told him not to be alarmed, and he soon understood, apparently, what we were aiming at. He was told he could have supper and then a smoke and then go into the stateroom where he would find a nice bed, a bottle of Madeira wine, a bottle of aguardiente, which is brandy, cigars, and everything to make him comfortable, and that the door would be locked and the key taken away, and he was to go to sleep and take it easy, and in the morning he would be let out and given $20, or about $750 on today's market, in gold. Don't say any more, he replied, that's enough. During the night hours, the men put boats onto the water and offloaded half their goods. These goods would be charged the highest tax. In the morning, they let the guard out, paid him off, and they sailed for Monterey, where they declared their load, falsified the documents, and paid their tax, which is about half the amount of the real cargo. The Mexicans got their tax and everybody was happy. Of course, everyone knew that smuggling could draw the death penalty. Now, Thomas Larkin approached this in a different way. Larkin came to California in 1832 by invitation from his half-brother, John Cooper. John Cooper, along with his sea captain job, became involved with the trading business. Cooper was not a good businessman and very unorganized. Cooper wanted Larkin to take charge of Cooper's business. While sailing from the East Coast, Larkin, always a ladies' man, met a young lady named Rachel Holmes, who was going to California to join her sea captain husband. Thomas and Rachel developed a friendship that turned into an affair. Not long after arriving in California, Rachel learned she was pregnant while her husband was still at sea. Problem. This left two of them with a major problem until Rachel learned that her husband died at sea. Thomas and Rachel did get married and went on to have more children. Larkin did get Cooper's business in order and even started his own business, which was very successful. Larkin soon learned that if someone could buy all the hides and tallow from the ranchos and then buy all the merchandise from the trade ships, he could control the market. He could get the best price from the Boston ships and sell the merchandise to the Mexicans at a huge profit. This was a welcome situation for the Boston ships because they could arrive, unload their goods, load the hides, and be gone in a few weeks rather than spending a year or two sailing up and down the coast. His counterpart in Los Angeles, Abel Stearns, did a similar thing. Larkin also traded in Mazatlan and other Mexican cities. This could very well be the first wholesale retail business in California. Larkin also observed that when American whalers came into port for supplies, meat, produce, and water did not have to pay the 100% duty because under Mexican law, these were items of necessity and therefore tax-free. Larkin took advantage of this and did a major trading business with not only the whalers, but military ships from America, and claiming that most of the goods were of necessity. Larkin was well-liked and treated well by the Mexican, being held in high regard. But this did not deter him from taking advantage of the mismanaged, did not deter him from taking advantage of this mismanaged and often corrupt Mexican government. With the discovery of gold on January 24th, 1848, everything in California changed. As J.S. Holliday said, the world rushed in, and we had all of these trails now coming to California because of the gold rush. But let's back up to 1846 and talk about the Mexican-American War and the New Southern Trail. In September of 1846, Kit Carson and 15 men left California with a message from Commodore Stockton to the President of the United States that the battles with Mexico and California were over. Carson was to return with a response within 120 days. This most likely was the first transcontinental mail delivery in our history. It was then that Carson meets Stephen Kearny and what is left of the Army of the West on the Rio Grande just south of Santa Fe on October 6, 1846. Carson relays the message to Kearny, who then orders Carson to hand over the mail to Thomas Fitzpatrick. Kearny's guide to deliver the message to the president so that Carson could guide Kearny, so that Carson could guide Kearny to California by the route that Carson had just come. And this was the same Indian pack route that Carson used in 1829 when he came to California with Ewing Young on a trapping expedition. So Carson was very familiar with the area. When Kearny learned the war situation in California was over, he sent most of his troops back to Santa Fe and only retained about 100 dragoons. He also kept 2 howitzers and 6 large wagons pulled by 8 mules each. What was not known to them is that unrest in California had restarted and escalated. By December 2nd, Kearny's army arrived at Warner's Ranch, which is about 65 miles east of San Diego. The Mormon Battalion, under the command of Colonel Cooke, was about 2 months behind in southeastern Arizona, building that military road to California. Kearny received a dispatch from Commodore Stockton about 150 rebels were encamped not far from San Pasqual, about 35 miles east of San Diego. This would be the well-trained Mexican horsemen and lancers under the command of Andres Pico. Kearny, not wanting to be cut off on his way to San Diego, decided on a surprise attack and attempted to hurry along his small force of about 120. Being that his men and animals were exhausted, it was rather a slow advance with rainy and cold weather conditions. When within a mile of the Mexican encampment, Pico's scouts spotted Kearny's troops. Even though it was dark night, Kearny ordered a first charge with his small advance group. Pico's men stood their ground, shouting, "Viva California!" and opened up with a volley of shots from their muskets. Captain Johnson was the first to die with a shot to the head. It would be a near slaughter of the American troops. Carson's horse stumbled and threw Carson to the ground, breaking his rifle. Carson lay on the ground awaiting his companions to ride past, grabbed a dead dragoon's carbine, and finding an unmounted horse, he quickly mounted and rejoined the battle. Pico, pleased with the damage inflicted upon the Americans, ordered his men to retreat about 1.5 miles to join in with the Lancers. Pico divided his men into 2 groups, with the ensuing battle being a disaster for the Americans. The American guns could not fire because of the rain wet their powder, leaving them having to resort to drawing their swords. But that was no match for the highly skilled horsemen mounted lancers. When Kearny's howitzer arrived, the Mexicans fled, leaving 18 Americans killed and about 17 wounded, including Kearny with 2 lance wounds. Carson came through unharmed. The Americans spent the next day and night on the battlefield, tending to the wounded and burying the dead. The next day, they moved on about 9 miles. As the Americans were moving west, they were suddenly attacked from the rear. Kearny's men, being on a hill, were able to fend off the Mexican advance, but were soon surrounded by Pico's troops. It would be a stalemate. Kearny sent Lieutenant Edward Beale with his Indian servant and Kit Carson to San Diego for help. This would not be an easy assignment. The 3 had to sneak through heavily patrolled Mexican lines. They lost their shoes, but were able to arrive in San Diego with badly injured feet. Hungry and dehydrated and near death's door. It would take Beale nearly 2 years to fully recover. Carson fared much better than Beale, but his Indian servant died of his injuries. On December 10th, 180 American rescue troops arrived to drive off Pico and his lancers. Kearny and Pico would both claim victory. I find that very entertaining. While all this was going on, the Mormon Battalion was continuing their most difficult and life-threatening work, building that military wagon road to San Diego. The group of bedraggled men and women finally arrived in San Diego on January 29, 1847. Their heroic road-building efforts, known as Cooke's Road, established a major transportation route and trade route to Southern California for years to come. Thank you very much.